I mean, all of the peptides that are being dispensed, whether by a med spa or whatever, are research-grade product. They're not approved for use in humans, and so we do not believe FDA can move fast enough to provide access to those drugs so that we don't have patients going to the black market, the gray market, and injecting themselves with substances that are not approved for use in humans.
Welcome to the Everything GLP-1 podcast. Today, I have the honor of having Scott Brunner, the CEO and president of APC, the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding in the U.S. His life has been very busy lately with the whole GLP-1 era and everything happening out there. So welcome, Scott. I really appreciate you taking time for us today.
Thanks, Thomas. Great to be with you, and glad that you're interested in what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been in obesity my whole life and was previously a surgeon, saw the GLP-1s coming. So about 5 years ago, I started developing a big GLP-1 weight loss practice and retired from surgery about 2.5 years ago. So it is my life. And we are very excited for what GLP-1s have done and how the compounding industry has really filled a void and impacted people in such a positive way with the GLP-1s.
Yeah, well, I believe that GLP-1s have changed compounding, and we can talk a bit about that. But I also think compounding has changed the accessibility of GLP-1 drugs. I think compounding can take credit for driving down the price of the FDA-approved drugs in a way that I don't think would have occurred without compounding. And so look forward to talking with you about these things.
Yeah, great. So give me a little history on you, because I know you've been with APC as the leader since 2019. How did you come into it, and how has your pathway been to 2026?
Yeah, well, I am a career association executive. I've worked for trade associations since shortly after graduating from college. Mostly came up through the communications track. In 2014, I came aboard as CEO of the Georgia Pharmacy Association. I was there for about 3 years, and then was hired to be the Senior VP of Communications at NCPA, the National Community Pharmacist Association. So that's the industry trade association that represents independent pharmacies. And then in 2019, APC at the time was IACP, the American Academy of Compounding Pharmacists. We later changed our name, but they came calling. And I joined the organization and have been here since. And what a ride. I wish I could have said I had great foresight and knew that this was going to be a really interesting association to work for, and that the media were going to be beating down our doors and all of that. But I didn't foresee it. It's just dumb luck, I guess.
Yeah, you've done a fantastic job, and you're the right person, in my opinion, because of your ability to comprehend multiple topics and your intelligence and your ability to speak and convey the message. You've done just an amazing job. But when did it take off? Like 2019, it's a little quieter time. When did you really get busy?
Well, just some recent history on compounding. Compounding, I fear, will always have a bit of a scar because of some events that occurred in 2011, 2012, the New England Compounding Center tragedy. That resulted in the Drug Quality and Security Act, or at least the compounding provisions of DQSA in 2013, which really hit compounding hard, and the industry itself, but certainly APC as the trade association, went into a bit of decline. And so those years between the passage of DQSA and the creation of 503Bs and all of that saw compounding really at its lowest point. We saw FDA again and again looking to enforce or impose, I guess, restrictions on compounding. I think compounded hormone therapy. The agency has traditionally had quite an antipathy for compounded hormones. They were looking for ways to restrict those. We were coming out of some of the pain cream scandals. Not all of that was the fault of compounding, but compounding got smeared in it. And so by 2019, the organization was in need of some revival. And I came on board about the time that FDA commissioned, I would say manipulated, a study with NASM, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, related to compounded hormone therapy, that basically recommended completely prohibiting the compounding of hormones until there could be research clinical trials and safety proven and all of that. And so one of my first tasks in this job was mounting a defense of compounded hormone therapy for the millions and millions of men and women who benefit from it. And we were able to do that. And frankly, even though we were pushing back against FDA, rebuild some credibility for the profession through those interactions. 2022, we begin to hear of these wonder drugs, GLP-1s. And by 2023, late 2022, early 2023, semaglutide, the active ingredient in the Novo Nordisk product, had gone into shortage and would remain on shortage for 3 years. Shortly after that, tirzepatide, the active ingredient in the Lilly drugs, came onto the scene immediately, pretty quickly, went into shortage. It was on shortage for about 2 years. And we began to see prescribers like you and others doing everything they could to provide their patients access to this drug that was indeed life-changing. And yet the drug was in shortage. And so they began to write prescriptions for compounded versions of semaglutide, of tirzepatide. And that's really when attention began to be focused on the industry in a way we've not seen before. We had all the negative that went along with the tragedy that was the New England compounding centers. With GLP-1s, we've been able to build and tell a story of patient access. I would argue that compounding pharmacies have provided Americans access to what is undeniably a wonder drug at a time when the makers of the FDA-approved drugs could not meet the demand, and frankly, coincidentally, at a price point that the patient could afford, and with a track record of safety that's really commensurate with that of the FDA-approved drugs. And yet, we still come under attack from drug makers and others, and so that's the battle we're fighting. Compounding exist in a rigorous compliance framework. Compounding pharmacies are conscientious and ethical healthcare providers who are doing daily everything they can to take care of their patients.
We see big pharma try to paint what I term the good guys that filled this need, the sterile compounders that are under their state boards, which are under the FDA. They try to paint them with this black gray market of who knows what's coming in the bottle from who knows where, no source, no doctor oversight on what they're taking. They try to lump them together as dangerous, which is it's a business strategy. We understand, but it's unfair and it confuses the public.
Well, and that's been one of the more interesting challenges for APC over the past several years. I have reporters, occasionally even regulators, who come to us not understanding that pharmacy compounding has been a part of the American healthcare system for generations, and in fact is the foundation of modern pharmacy practice. I've had reporters who seem to think that compounding was born out of the development of GLP-1s, and it was this new thing that pharmacies could do. And so half the battle is educating reporters and via reporters the public about what compounding is and does. It is easy when you don't understand pharmacy compounding to believe some of what drug makers have tried to do in conflating, counterfeit activity, and that absolutely is going on. By the way, it is a scourge, but that is not what legitimate compounding pharmacies do. And those two things don't belong in the same bucket. But again and again, we've seen drug makers conflate the two. Even most recently in testimony before state legislative committees as they try to get restrictive legislation passed in now over a dozen states, and I'm just it boggles the mind how they can misrepresent what compounding actually is and does. But that's the battle right now. They are not only suing compounding pharmacies, but they are attempting to give their drugs special position, preferential treatment in state law in a number of states. And so for the past 6 to 8 months, that's been the heart of the battle we've been fighting.
How are the states different? Because obviously you have state boards that are their own little, group. They're all under the FDA, but how do states vary as far as one state that might get the value of compounding where others don't?
Yeah. So let me give you the quick tutorial. I mean, compounding uh, practice in the U.S. has really three threads of regulation, all of which must be adhered to. So, first of all, you have the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act sets out what ingredients can be used in a compounded drug. And so, if a substance doesn't meet one of those criteria, compounding pharmacies can't touch it, regardless of what the state allows. And the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, of course, authorizes FDA to be the regulatory agency that oversees compounding. You also have the standards of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, the compounding chapters of USP that set industry-wide standards for how compounding is done, all of the process and compliance for non-sterile compounding, for sterile compounding. There's even a chapter, USP 800, that is focused on the safety of the compounders themselves, the staff who work in compounding pharmacies. And those chapters, those standards of USP are a part of compounding law in all 50 states in one way or another. Some states just accept all of them into law by reference, verbatim. Other states may tweak them somewhat, but the standards do exist in that way. And then you have state pharmacy license law. These are state boards of pharmacy. And as I'm sure you know, compounding pharmacy is a little bit different from traditional retail pharmacy practice. And so a pharmacy that may specialize in a certain compounded therapy could be providing drugs for patients, again, pursuant to a prescription, but in multiple states. And so a pharmacy in Metairie, Louisiana might be licensed in 8 states or 12 states or 38 states. They are bound by the license laws of every state to which they ship drugs. And so when you think about regulatory, I mean, it can be a hairball sometimes because Texas law may say one thing and Louisiana says another and Alabama says another, and they have to be compliant with all of those. The real shorthand way to look at it is FDA regulates the substances of pharmacy compounding, the products. State boards of pharmacy regulate the practice of pharmacy compounding.
In USP, that's an organization that sets standards that can be adopted by the state boards, but they all do it a little differently as far as what they accept.
Yeah, there are usually, I mean, many states do accept by reference. It's verbatim. USP Chapter 795 for non-sterile, 797 for sterile. But about half the states have the ability, the board, to make decisions about which provisions of USP they will accept and not. Texas is a fairly prominent state in adapting the USP standards, whereas there may be other states, and I don't want to misquote, but maybe Massachusetts, New York, that accept the USP chapters by reference. They become a part of the state pharmacy law.
That gets very complicated for a pharmacy that's in multiple states, making sure they're compliant with every state's law, which can be changing over time.
Absolutely. And if you are a pharmacy that's licensed in all 50 states, and quite a few compounding pharmacies are, it is highly likely that you have at least one, if not more, staff members solely devoted to keeping track of the licensing requirements in the variety of states in which you operate.
Right, right, that makes sense. Wow. Now, with this whole era, we had this is kind of the world I live in, more of a customized, personalized care. You know, I'm 64. I don't want any off the shelf treatment for me. So I feel like the compounding industry, the 503As, really fit that niche of customized, personalized care for an individual. We're all different. We have different DNA and different, health, and different demands on us. So I think that customized, personalized care, obviously physician overseen with the 503A pharmacies, is where healthcare is going.
Absolutely, and that's an important point. I think, particularly in some of the media coverage of the GLP-1 frenzy, there's been this misunderstanding, I think, by reporters that pharmacies are making decisions about which drugs a patient gets. But nothing happens in a compounding pharmacy until a prescriber, using his or her judgment, determines that a particular compounded formulation is appropriate for an individual patient. And the food, I've mentioned the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act authorizes compounding in two circumstances. One is when an FDA-approved drug is in shortage, and so 3 years with semaglutide, 2 years with tirzepatide. That's why compounders could prepare essentially copies of the FDA-approved drugs. The other circumstance is when a prescriber like you determines that a particular patient needs a special formulation, a dosage form or a dosage strength, or even a combination of drugs that is not commercially available. There's no off-the-shelf corollary for that particular drug. And I'll go back to compounded hormone therapy. 75 milligram progesterone does not exist commercially, and yet many prescribers have patients who need that particular strength. And so, if you want your patient to have that strength of progesterone, the prescriber has to write for a compounded version of it. And that's precisely why compounding pharmacies exist. Off the shelf medications are not appropriate in every instance for every patient.
Right, right. And I really think if you asked any individual patient, do you want off the shelf or do you want a listening doctor to customize your care for you? What are you going to say? So it's an easy argument. All my friends want to optimize their health in a customized way and they want the best of the best. And sometimes, that's with an off the shelf substance, but a lot of times it's a personalized prescription that you need to get from a compounding pharmacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why compounding exists in the healthcare system. It is not intended to be competition for FDA approved drugs. It's designed to fill holes in care that the FDA approved drugs do not fill.
Right. Interestingly, there's another GLP-1, of course, coming out in the next year called retatrutide that Eli Lilly is coming out with. I don't know the exact time frame. You probably know better than me. But there's a giant black market for that drug right now. Like everybody in the gym, they're whispering to each other, "Oh, you got to have retatrutide, retatrutide." And here's your black market, gray market source. So you would think big pharma would be worried about the black market, gray market, which is actually the no oversight treatment that's actually in competition with them.
Yeah, well, and the reason there's black market and gray market on retatrutide in particular is because it's not FDA approved yet. It is off limits for pharmacies.
Right.
I believe that market will be hurt once FDA does give final approval to retatrutide. But we have the same situation with peptides. I mean, all of the peptides that are being dispensed, whether by a med spa or whatever, are research grade product. They're
Right.
not approved for use in humans, and so we do not believe FDA can move fast enough
Right.
to provide access to those drugs so that we don't have patients going to the black market, the gray market, and injecting themselves with substances that are not approved for use in humans.
Right. Interestingly, a lot of people don't know that the GLP-1s are peptides,
Right.
and so
Right.
they
Yeah.
are, and the market for the peptides that went on the Category 2 list, meaning you couldn't, get them anymore in the US, is so big. I mean, you have all these young kids driving this, market for peptides that have no oversight. They don't know where the source is. There's no doctor actually looking at the patient and saying, this will be good for you, or this is your dose, this is your frequency, and obviously no potency, sterility, endotoxin testing. It's bad across the board, yet that market is giant and growing. So, like you said, the FDA cannot move fast enough to get this under oversight where you can have the testing and oversight of the product and a real physician recommending the med as opposed to just ordering off this black market.
Yeah, and that is our position on peptides. I mean, we would be the first to admit that the safety data, the research clinical trials for many of these peptides just does not exist. And yet, you've got this black market and gray market where people are injecting themselves with God knows what. And there is high potential for adverse reactions, et cetera. And so we are arguing to FDA that this moment needs a special lane. We believe that a compounded peptide injectable prepared by a state licensed pharmacy in a USP compliant clean room pursuant to a prescription from a legitimate provider is a much better course of therapy than something you're going to get from out of somebody's trunk or from a chat room, et cetera. We think it's necessary to allow pharmacies to prepare those drugs just to blunt what is this enormous and growing black market and gray market.
Right. I mean, it's hard to argue with that, and sourced, from an FDA registered inspected facility as opposed to who knows where the source is when, these vials come. So, um, what's your feeling on that? And you can not answer it if you want. And how do you think Marty McCrary stepping down, does that impact the compounding industry positively, negatively, or zero?
I don't know. I think most of the action at FDA right now is being driven more by HHS Secretary Kennedy than Dr. McCary. I have understood there to have been some headbutting and disagreement between those two over certain, well beyond compounding, but a variety of therapies, and that's everything from vaccines and mifepristone to some of the compounded therapies, peptides, GLP-1s.
Right.
We are urging FDA to view these peptides through a different lens, just because, as I said, the scale of the illicit market right now is just ripe for a bunch of patients to source something from some non FDA registered provider, inject themselves, and a bunch of Americans die because of it.
Right.
The one thing we could do is create a lane for compounding pharmacies to prepare these drugs with enhanced column guardrails, additional data gathering, patient reported outcomes, maybe an enhanced disclosure for the patient so that they know that the drug is not as well characterized as other drugs may be. But again, we think patients are going to be much safer that way. And I think Secretary Kennedy is inclined to agree with that. He has put in place this process where peptides are going to go before the PCAC committee, the Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee. Committee will make a recommendation to FDA. FDA can take or leave that recommendation. But I do sense and hope that we're moving toward a universe where compounding pharmacies can prepare these within the rigorous framework that already exists, and perhaps with some additional guardrails so that we can gather patient-reported outcomes data about, if you're taking BPC 157, let's make you report each month before your refill. Answer a 5-question questionnaire about how the drug worked for you. And gathering that sort of data helps us understand safety in the long term of these substances.
I love that idea, being a physician, so implementing some kind of tracking, of patients, realizing that patients jump from one pharmacy to another based on pricing. It's not going to be perfect, but some kind of framework where we can get some real long-term data on these peptides, because no one else is getting it. And the market, that black market, is frightening and giant and growing.
And the trick, I think, is going to be to do that in a way that doesn't overburden the prescriber, it doesn't overburden the pharmacy, and goodness knows we don't want to overburden the patient with a lot of reporting and data gathering. And so we got to figure out a way, what do those guardrails look like, and how do you streamline the process of staying within the guardrails?
Right, right, exactly. The PCAC meeting, as I know it, is the end of July.
It is. FDA has proposed 7 peptides, including BPC 157, for consideration by PCAC, and then has basically announced that sometime before, I think it said the end of the first quarter of 2027, they'll have another PCAC meeting to consider a bunch of other peptides. Some of those, the ones that were recently declassified from List 2. So we'll see what happens with those. I suspect that we will be providing feedback, testimony, comment to FDA and PCAC, urging them to create a special lane for these. Because again, if FDA is going to use the same lens it's always used, which is research clinical trials that are demonstrating beyond doubt or almost beyond doubt the safety and efficacy of a drug, I do not think you're going to have that for a bunch of these peptides. But I still think they ought to be authorized for compound.
Yeah, I mean, the argument is simple. The market's there, it's being filled, it's growing, and it's incredibly dangerous in my view. And there needs to be a safer pathway. So,
Yeah.
um, that's great. What other topics, because you see the whole world in the compounding pharmacy space and the GLP-1 space and the peptide space. What other topics you think are worthy and that people would really want to hear?
Well, compounding, as I said, has existed long before GLP-1s, and there are so many therapies right now that are actually growing as prescribers become more aware of their ability to prescribe these things. That's one. If you don't mind a personal anecdote, I have a son who is a third year, just starting third year medical residency at the University of Michigan healthcare system. He went through 4 years of medical school and never heard a word about compounded drugs.
It's crazy.
All they were taught was FDA approved drugs, and they come out of medical school and they got one arrow in their quiver, and that's the one that they have to pull out every time. Now,
Yep.
Jackson, my son, knew compounded drugs because he has a dad that works for the trade association. But I think prescribers in many ways are biased against compounded drugs. And we would be the first to say, by the way, Tom, if an FDA-approved drug is appropriate for a patient, that's the drug that ought to be prescribed. FDA-approved drugs are the gold standard, certainly in America and across the world. But we also have to recognize that sometimes prescribers need the ability to customize therapies. And a lot of physicians don't even know that they can do that. Or if they do know that they can do it, they've been so biased against compounded drugs because compounded drugs are not FDA approved. That does not mean they are inherently unsafe, and so they're unwilling to prescribe them. So that is one of the challenges, I think, is better educating a lot of prescribers about what a good suite of tools compounded drugs can be in treating individual patients.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We spent time educating the head of state boards, like the medical board, where they don't really even understand it, and they're in the highest position in the state. So education has to play a key role. And the other thing, the growing industry, like I said, is this personalized care. It's a functional medicine industry that is, people are finally understanding that that's a legitimate industry, and it's not just treating patients for the based on your reimbursement pipeline. It's based on what's best for the patient. And our system is so set up to treat chronic disease and check off, insurance requirements so you get your payment. And that has diverted real care away from what is good for this patient that's sitting in front of me right now. And certainly there's a move back to that personalized care as far as avoiding chronic disease and never getting to the point where you have a laundry list of chronic diseases. You're on 18 medicines. People want to be healthier, live at a high level longer. And I think compound pharmacies fit in so perfectly to the whole functional medicine, optimize your health, live your life at the highest level, and don't wait until you get chronic disease to access our healthcare system.
Well, and what patient-reported outcome data we have shows that those who take compounded drugs are generally just as content with the compounded drug, just as happy with the results as those who might take FDA-approved medications. And again, I'm not suggesting that compounded drugs should be a substitute for FDA-approved, but in terms of satisfaction, in terms of achieving the goal, the again, patient-reported outcomes surveys that we've done, particularly in the GLP-1 era, those who have taken essentially copies of an FDA-approved drug, a compounded terzepatide, semaglutide, or a customized formulation, are showing satisfaction numbers that are just as good as those for the FDA-approved drugs.
Right. That's what we see in our practices. Great. Where are you right now?
I am in Washington, D.C. This is, I was traveling last week. I live in D.C., and so I'm home this week. Have a trip to Richmond to do some legislative strategy on Thursday, but I'm pretty much in this week. And then I begin a month-long swing next week where I'm gone 3, 4, maybe the entire week for about 4 weeks in a row.
Wow.
I get a lot of Delta points.
You get a lot of Delta points, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. I hope this is helpful. And Tom, we appreciate you guys. You are great members of the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, and I'm just grateful to you for all you do.
Yeah, we're so grateful to you also, and appreciate you taking time for us. And I can't wait to bring you back and continue the story. So
sounds good. I'll look forward to that.
Okay. Well, once again, we're thanking Scott for being here. We'll see you next week with more great insight and information to help patients navigate their journey.